Hello, everybody. Welcome to Cheese O'Clock. My name is Laura Werlin, and you are in for an hour of amazing cheeses and wines this hour. And although that's an hour twice. Although we have amazing cheeses and wines every Cheese O'Clock, in my opinion, not so humble opinion, the reason that this one is special to me and to Janet, and I think to everybody, is because this is the Wonder Women of American cheese. And that's no understatement. It is really, I would say that the American cheese scene was built by women and continues to be upheld by women. Back in the old days, way back, cheese making was actually called women's work because it was done in the kitchen. So many times the women milked the animals, usually cows back then, and also made the cheese. And it wasn't until, in Wisconsin anyway, it wasn't until the turn of the century, the 1900s, that dairy people, well, there was, men were resisting dairy farms. They were growing crops that kept dying year after year because the weather wasn't hospitable. So they decided, but because dairying was women's work, they resisted doing what made sense for their climate. Ultimately, they did it when they realized they could make money, and thus dairying was born in the way we know it in the state of Wisconsin. But there was a mentality around that. But anyway, that's your little history lesson for the day. So we have one amazing American cheesemaker with us tonight, Jodi Ohlsen from Shepherd's Way Farm. We have one amazing winemaker from Cambria Winery, Jill Russell. And, but also we have one amazing cheese person, writer, colleague, co-host here, Janet Fletcher. And before I introduce Janet, I will just tell you one little thing about me, which is that I am a writer and author and speaker and virtual tasting host, I guess, these days. And anyway, cheese is my life, and I will hand it to Janet now, whose life is also very much cheese.
Yeah, I call us Team Cheese, Laura.
There you go, exactly.
We've been doing this a long time, and I am Janet Fletcher. I'm the publisher of the Planet Cheese blog and the author of a few books on cheese. And Laura and I just are so excited to bring Cheese O'Clock to you because we have missed teaching about cheese in person. And this is, I wouldn't even say this is the next best thing. This is just another thing, this virtual world. It really has allowed us to bring cheese to more people across the country and to bring a lot of cheese lovers together. So I hope you all will use the chat to kind of connect with each other, and that you'll use the Q&A function to send us questions. We do try to answer questions as they come up, if they seem like relevant to the discussion right then, or we will hold them till the end and try to get to a lot of your questions at the end. It is International Women's Week, which is why we decided to pay this tribute to women, great women in cheese and wine. So I do want to ask, while your cheese board is beautiful, if you've made an effort to make a nice presentation, take a picture of your cheese, take a selfie of yourself at Cheese O'Clock, and Laura's showing you how. And please post it, hashtag Cheese O'Clock. Tag Laura and me. She's cheese at Cheese Lady with a Z, and I'm at Janet Fletcher NV for Napa Valley, which is where I am. So with that, we will let me turn it back to Laura, and we will get started with Cheese O'Clock.
Okay, I am going to introduce Jill Russell, who is the winemaker at Cambria Winery. Jill, I think you're muted, so if you want to, there you go. Just in case I say something wrong, I want you to be able to correct me right away. So Jill is from the city of Livermore, but was always drawn to San Luis Obispo, where her brother went to school, and she went to school at Cal Poly as well. And conveniently, they had just started the enology degree or viticulture. And so Jill was drawn to that, spent a semester making wine in Adelaide, Australia, and then got a job in the Edna Valley, which is just kind of north of, well, it's really where San Luis Obispo is, just a little south of there. And then the rest is history. She got the dream job of her life, working at Cambria, where she remains and wants to be, according to well, I'm not going to give the last line away. Anyway, let me introduce Jill Russell here.
Hi, everyone. I had a motorcycle out front, so I was kind of like, go away. It wasn't the dog this time. Thank you for having me. I had so much fun on the last one with you, Laura. I learned so much, so I'm excited to get into it. I'll get into the wines later. We do have a short video. We have a couple videos that we thought we'd kind of welcome you to Cambria. So let's start with that video.
Katherine and Julia's vineyards are awesome vineyards to work with. They're also amazing people, and I think about them when I'm out in the vineyards and when I'm blending. What wine embodies them?
We've grown up here ever since we were small children, since we were babies actually.
It's always been a special spot for us and it feels like home.
It's a huge honor to have vineyards named after us.
There's a lot of love and attention to detail and hard work that goes into farming these grapes and making these wines every year.
We're also very connected to the land, so we have a sense of responsibility since the land is providing for us to take care of the land. Not only are we a family-owned winery, we're also 100% estate-grown and estate-bottled fruit.
Santa Maria is so great for Pinot Noir and Chardonnay because of the climate. We want a long ripening season and long hang time to get those full flavors. We're in this valley that opens up to the coast, brings in the fog, so we have this cooling effect from the fog and wind. Katherine's vineyard just brings so much. When I'm thinking about the blend and tasting barrels, I'm thinking tropical notes. And we want that citrus, we want the acid, we want the texture, and what Santa Maria really does bring is texture. Julia's vineyard's been amazing to work with. I've worked with Pinot Noir from Santa Maria Valley for 10 years. I've always witnessed this spice that this Pinot Noir has, and those different clones in different areas in the vineyard bring those different spices or darker fruit. We love it. Something that's unique about Cambria is we're led by strong female leaders.
Being female-owned and female-led is a beautiful thing that we don't take lightly.
Working with Jill, she brings so much energy and passion and excitement, and you can feel that every time you're with her.
It is something to talk about, and it is special, so now I really embody it, and I take it on, and I love sharing that message.
I think it's really inspiring to see so many women who are really great at their jobs, and they love what they do.
I love being here. I feel so welcome into the family. I'm Jill Russell, head winemaker at Cambria Estate. Can I say I want to be here the next 20 years?
Yeah. It actually will be like 30 years or plus, so it'll just go on and on.
That's pretty great. So tell us what we have today, what we're tasting.
So you got to meet Katie and Julia, which is great to put a face to the names of the vineyards. So we're all estate, like I mentioned, which is great. So total control, just like when you're making cheese, you want that total control start to finish. Today we have our Katherine's Vineyard Chardonnay. And if you ordered through the sign up, you got the 2019. But we're in a vintage roll. So if you got it locally or somewhere else or a little bit early, you probably got the 2018. And Janet, did the 2019 arrive just now?
Did you just hear the doorbell?
Yeah.
Yes. I've been waiting for this wine for like 6 days and it just came.
So
I just
you
stuck
might
it in the
have both.
fridge. I stuck it in the freezer.
Yeah, so 2018, 2019 Katherine's Vineyard Chardonnay. And then we have the 2018 Julia's Vineyard Pinot Noir. So we're excited to go through the cheeses with the two wines. And yeah, we'll get into them.
Cheers, everybody.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, you'll tell us about, okay, because I'd like to know more about the wines themselves, but we can go right into the tasting, I guess, Janet. And
Okie dokie. Yeah,
introduction.
first of all, let me remind everybody that we have one more cheese o'clock next Thursday when we will be doing it's called Age to Perfection, all cheeses that have been aged and are improved by this aging process. So that's a fun one that we haven't done before. And also to remind you that we record all these sessions, so you can, if you didn't buy the cheese and you want to go back and experience a prior cheese o'clock, you can still go on iGourmet, buy those collections. They're all still available, and listen to the recordings. The recordings are on my site in my video archive, and I think, Laura, you have them, or do you have some of them on your site?
I have some on my
Not
site
yet?
right now and more to come.
Okay, So you know, have a cheese party with a prior cheese o'clock, and we hope you'll join us next week as well for the final one in this series. And that with that, I'm going to just turn it back to Laura.
Okay. We will get into tasting now. And because I'm afraid that I'm going to forget, I just want to say one thing. Jill, in that video, you talked about the texture of that you get in your wines. And so I think that's going to come in really handily with these tastings when it comes to pairing. So I'm just planting that seed. Okay. I almost don't want to pick this cheese up, but I kind of do, because it's just, well, it's a little bit light where I am. But look at this gorgeous, I mean, who would think of this as a cheese? You know, it's kind of, I don't know, it's like this perfectly sculpted, well, sphere, cheese, whatever. It's made by Capriole goat cheese, which is in Greenville, Indiana, just over the river from Louisville, Kentucky. And it's a place, an operation that was started and continues to be owned by a woman named Jodi Shad. And oh, the stories she can tell. She's a storyteller anyway, but just as a goat cheese maker, she started in the 1980s, which in American cheese land is ancient times, because so much has happened in these 50 years or 40 years. But in any case, this particular cheese was inspired back in the early 90s when she and another very well-known woman cheesemaker named Mary Keane took a trip to France, a cheese making trip. They wanted to just see how it was done kind of at the mothership there. And they were both making fresh goat cheese at the time, but they wanted to learn how to make ripened or aged goat cheeses. And so that's part of the reason they went there. Well, one of the places they went is a place where they make a well-known cheese called Banon, which is a chestnut leaf wrapped cheese that Jodi also makes a version of when she can get the chestnut leaves, which she can't right now. And she saw them making a round cheese called Boulet, and she was inspired by that. And so that ultimately led to this Wabash Cannonball, the idea of it. But there, it didn't have, so in France, they were able to get a particular kind of a yeast that she back here could not get. It's called geotrichum. So she had to make this originally with the other well-known mold called Penicillium candidum. So that's what you see on brie, the white bloomy rind as it's often referred to. So she had to make this cheese that way. And the other thing was neither she nor Mary, who created the Humboldt Fog, could get vegetable ash at the time. So what you see on the outside here is edible vegetable ash. That's the gray. She couldn't get it except at a pharmacy in a little capsule. There was no cheese making supplier that had it at the time. So talk about a makeshift, venture and adventure. She called it Wabash Cannonball for a number of reasons. Certainly the shape. There's also the Wabash River that runs through there. There's also a well-known Johnny Cash song called Wabash Cannonball, named for a train that was actually later named the Wabash Cannonball because of the popularity of the song, but it was on the Wabash train tracks or something like that. It was kind of a funny set of circumstances. And Purdue in Indiana, Purdue University, their fight song is the Wabash Cannonball. So this has all kinds of lore associated with it, but fundamentally it is a goat cheese. And it is so it's made, it's pasteurized, it's completely hand rolled. So this cheese is all about the labor and love. And over time, so it takes 12 days to go from vat to market. But then after that, it can live 4 to as much as 6 weeks, they say, they meaning the cheesemaker. And what'll happen is, so my version is pretty young, I would say. So meaning that there isn't a cream line that forms under the rind. Again, the light makes it a little hard to see. But normally there would be a cream line, just not normally, but just further along in the cheese aging process, just under the rind. So it would almost look like a 3-layer cheese. Well, that's not the case here, at least as far as I can see. It looks a little younger than that. But that doesn't mean it's not good. It's probably really delicious. I haven't tried it yet. But in effect, they start with the fresh goat cheese, and then they drain it, and then they form it into balls. It's got the yeast I was referring to, the geotrichum. It's got a little bit of the candidum, the white part, and then that edible vegetable ash that basically sets the rind up for development. It neutralizes the acidity in the surface so that the mold can grow. Okay, I'm going to taste it. You all are probably ahead of me. And if you are, feel free to weigh in.
Well, I will, because
Okay.
I've tasted it, and it's divine. Mine actually does have a little bit of a cream line. It's maybe a little bit further along than yours is. A couple of things that I'm really admiring about this cheese, the rind is very thin. I love to see that it's not thick and dry and cracked. It's very moist. It's a little bit damp. I do have a bit of a cream line, and it's clinging to the paste. The rind is. It's not pulling away. So that's a good thing. The cheese itself is very clean tasting. It's not chalky or goaty. It's very mild and mellow and just kind of deep in flavor. One thing I wanted to mention, Laura, because we're talking about great women winemakers and International Women's Week. The cheesemaker, Jodi, and Mary Keene, whom Laura mentioned, and two or three other women are still referred to this day as the goat ladies of American cheese, because all these original cheesemakers were women, and they make goat cheese because it's easy to work with goats. It's kind of a low bar to entry because they don't cost that much like a cow. And so we owe such a tribute to these goat ladies of cheese, one of which was Jodi Shad.
Well, and
so
I'm sorry.
I think it's really in great, my piece is really in great shape. Of course, we're all having different pieces, but mine is perfection. I loved it with the Pinot. And Jill, did you have a preference?
I did this last time where I just loved all of the above. But yeah, with the rind, especially the Pinot, I think worked better, but I do love the Chardonnay. I think the Chardonnay got a little like creaminess to it and a really long finish.
Mm-hmm. I like it with both also. I feel like
okay, that's allowed then. Okay, good.
Well,
especially when they're your children, you don't have to choose.
I feel like with the that lemony quality in the goat cheese really finds its way with the Chardonnay, which is not a lemony wine, but it's got the acidity just comes through really nicely. But I kind of feel like with the Pinot, it extends both the cheese and the wine longer together, and I like that too. I like them both. But I was going to say, part of the reason that you talk about the goat ladies, Janet, and it is true that some of these people came to cheese making because it was practical, because they had goats already. And in the case of Mary and Jennifer Bice, who has Redwood Hill Farm, they were big goat people. And then, there are other reasons too, but these goat ladies, Redwood Hill, as I mentioned, Vermont Creamery was started by one of those goat ladies, Laura Chanel Chev in Sonoma. She's the mother of them all. Actually, that's exactly what Jodi Shad says about Laura Chanel. She's the mother of us all. So, and then with this cheese, just going back to that, what I love is the texture. It's, you expect, even you look at, it looks like it's going to be a little bit curdy, a little bit dry. It is so not. It is just creamy on the palate and smooth and velvety and oh my gosh. And that's why it kind of just goes, both wines are super refreshing. Like it just lifts it off your palate and makes way for another one. And one other thing I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead. Well, I'm seeing a really interesting comment in the chat.
Okay.
Because like you, I say Wabash Cannonball. Apparently that's not how you pronounce it.
Oh, do we have an Indiana on?
We must. She's saying it's not pronounced with a broad A. So that would mean Wabash Cannonball. Yes. Anyway, we stand corrected.
Okay. Thank you, Stephanie,
Okay.
for the correction. We can use that. I was just going to say that somebody asked if I had said chestnuts when I was talking about Jodi's cheese called Ohlsen. In France, it's called, or Banon, but Jodi's, she riffed on it and it's called Ohlsen. Yes, I said chestnut leaves. So just making clear about that. Okay, so Jana, I want to bring up this comment too. Somebody said that their Wabash is totally dry and hard, not at all creamy, and a stronger flavor. So my thought, in answer to you asked thoughts, and my response would be that it's older and that it was kept in a less humid, under less humid conditions. So it had the chance to dry out, which, by the way, is not always a bad thing with a cheese like this. You see lots of cheeses like this in France at farmers markets in particular, where they're desiccated and they're still quite delicious. So it sounds like you've got the older, drier version is what I would say.
Yeah, so use it, what they do in France is they use it as a grating cheese.
Yeah. So
you can grate it over pasta or, on top of anything that you would normally put, like, any pecorino or Parmigiano over a grated goat cheese. It's really a delicious thing. So you've got a prize there. Should we move to our next cheese?
I think better. And by the way, I just want to point out that the next cheese, the cheesemaker, the namesake cheesemaker, Marieka, is on the call. So if you all want to just, shout out a little love to her via the chat, feel free to do it if you love her cheese, and don't say anything if you don't, okay?
You're going to love it. You're going to love it. This is incredible Gouda. And I'm going to say Gouda, okay? We know that if you're in Holland, you're going to say Gouda. But I think I'm going to say Gouda. Gouda sounds like kind of a greeting, how people would say Gouda. But we're going to say Gouda tonight. This is really an unusual cheese because it is raw milk and it's farmstead and it's Gouda. And there are very few raw milk farmstead Gouda, certainly in this country, even in the Netherlands. They are really a dying thing. In fact, the definition of Gouda in the Netherlands, called the legal definition, is for pasteurized milk. So there are very few raw milk Goudas. And we're really lucky that Marieka, when she was a young woman, she grew up on a dairy farm in the Netherlands, 60 cows, and I just always wanted to be a dairy farmer. And she met a man with the same dream. They came over to Wisconsin because they couldn't afford the land in the Netherlands to have their dairy farm. So they found this tiny town in Wisconsin, and the people were friendly and the land was affordable. So they moved over here and they started their dairy, intending to just sell milk. But they started to miss Gouda. Their friends were from the Netherlands, and when their family visited, they would bring the Gouda in suitcases. So they, for the Marieka Pinterman and her husband, they have just a supply for themselves. And then remember, like 20 years ago, when the airlines started to get stricter about luggage allowances, and you suddenly had to pay for the extra bag. So their Gouda supply dried up. So Marieka and her husband said, we got to do something about this. So Marieka went back to the Netherlands and learned how to make Gouda, came back to Thorpe, Wisconsin, and started making Gouda. And she just immediately started winning awards for her Gouda. She, and since we're talking about women, she was the first woman to win the award of the Wisconsin Young Farmer of the Year. So that's pretty cool. That was several years ago. They launched this in 2006, so they've been making it for 15 years. One thing to notice about it, first of all, we're going to see a video when I shut up, but notice in the video what happens at the end, and it will explain why this rind looks the way it does. So let's cue up that video. Okay. I want to quickly explain 4 things that you saw in that video. I hope you noticed. First of all, you saw the cheese in a brine bath. That's how it gets seasoned, how it gets salted. It was being pulled out of the brine bath. This Gouda actually spends 60 hours in a brine bath getting salted. So that's what that was all about. You saw the pine boards that they use in the aging room. Marieka actually didn't like our American pine, so she sent to the Netherlands for that pine. She found that the American pine was too strong. So those are special pine boards that allow the cheese to have some interchange with the wood, which cheesemakers believe is really important. You saw them turning the cheese a lot. This is the way you get that beautiful symmetry in a Gouda, that symmetrical appearance that's just perfect in this cheese. And also it keeps the moisture and the fat moving evenly throughout the cheese. So turning might seem like a simple thing, but it's really important to turn it, regularly and often. And lastly, you saw the cheese it looked like it was being frosted like a cake, but it's actually being painted with a polymer, a food grade polymer that it keeps mold from forming on the outside, but it still allows the cheese to breathe. You possibly have bought at a supermarket an inexpensive, commodity Gouda that had red wax on the outside or a heavy wax coating. That's done for the less expensive Goudas, the less artisan Goudas, and it keeps the moisture in. I mean, if you're going to sell cheese, you want the maximum weight because that's how your cheese is sold. So that wax coating keeps the moisture in, and it really slows down the aging. This polymer breathes, so the Gouda has some air exchange, and it's going to continue to develop. Note the eyes, the little holes. Not every Gouda has them, but this one does. It comes from adding a culture to the cheese that creates gas. So it's about 9 months old, and you can peel off this. You can peel off that coating, that polymer, and peels right off. And the cheese, you can eat the rind. So let's taste it. And I'm sure, Laura, you're ahead of me. What did you think?
I can't even talk because I love this, love this so much. So, I mean, one of the things is that this cheese has won. It came very close to winning. Now I'm blanking whether it was the U.S. Cheese Championships or the World Cheese Championship. Which one was it, Janet?
I think it was the U.S. Cheese Champion. She called herself the U.S. Grand Champion, so that's the U.S. Cheese Champion.
That would be that.
In Wisconsin.
And I mean, out of about 1 million cheeses, and actually, Marieka was featured on a CBS Sunday Morning feature. It was all the lead up to the award. I mean, to the judging, and was she going to win or was she not going to win? And she came like within literally like 1/100 of a point from getting the grand prize or something. And so you look at this cheese and it kind of looks very white on my screen, but kind of like it's you think, okay, it's going to be all right. But then you taste it and it's got so much going on. And like you were saying, Janet, you think of Gouda as just being kind of a cheese that you get on an airplane, or you used to if you flew and they gave food away, but back in the old days a year ago. But this is I just love the complexity of it. And it's not like a super aged Gouda, which we're going to have at next week's Age to Perfection Cheese O'Clock, which is a many-year-old Gouda, where you think of sherry and you think of, or just I don't know, just kind of super butterscotchy. This has some of that, but not to that extent. And what I love about it is that it's really good on its own, but it's also soft enough that you could probably melt it if you wanted to use this cheese for such a purpose. Anyway, I just love it.
Somebody wanted to know how much it weighed. It's an 18-pound wheel. Also, maybe your wedge is doing what mine is doing. It's weeping. It's got little bits of moisture in the eyes. So cheesemakers say it's weeping. Mm-hmm. And it's not a flaw. It's just, some free whey coming out. And it's considered kind of a nice thing to see that weeping. This cheese is getting, as it gets more mature, it's going to start to get crystals in it. I'm not getting any crystals in my piece. It's very creamy at 9 months, but this cheese can go for like, 2 years, and it's going to get just more intense and more crystalline. Jill, what did you think wine-wise?
So this one, I really did prefer the Pinot Noir, and I am blown away by this cheese. Usually I don't tend to go for Gouda, except if it's an aged Gouda with those crystals like you're talking about. But this one I loved a lot. And I also thought that was a great video, seeing all the steps, and it just kind of makes me think of the winemaking and all the steps that goes into the blends, especially this Julia's Vineyard Pinot Noir, and how you're saying the rind breathes. That's just like our barrels, all our wines being aged in barrels, and that's helping evolve the wine. Laura, back to that texture thing. Both these wines have texture, and again, it's the climate that we have, that ocean influence that I mentioned, but also the process too. So having the Chardonnay, we leave it on the lees and stir, so that's adding texture and body and weight to the wine. And then with the Pinot Noir, those oak barrels play a role. So the different toast levels and that breathing, really, like it's not just wine in a bunch of tanks. It's breathing and doing its thing and evolving, just like the cheese. It's cool.
I want to mention one more thing about this Gouda that I didn't say, which is that Gouda is a very specific process. It's a very specific recipe that's very different from almost any other cheese. You've all probably heard about washed rind cheeses, which we're going to have at the end, but this is a washed curd cheese, which means that if you can imagine like that vat of curd floating in whey, right after the milk's been coagulated, you have this thing that looks like a block of tofu floating in whey. If you're going to make Gouda, what you do is you draw off that whey and you replace it with water. And you might do that more than once, because when you take off the whey, you're removing, there's a lot of lactose in the whey, unfermented lactose. So the milk sugar, you're removing that. So that means you're kind of limiting how much lactic acid can develop in the cheese. So you get a sweeter cheese, a more mellow cheese. And that's really the kind of number one characteristic of a Gouda, is that it's got that beautiful sweetness to it. So there's the dog.
I was going to say that exact thing. I'm glad you did that, Janet. And I just want to thank you, Lori. We have some people, as I said, Marieka is tuning in, and so is Marieka's operation. And I want to say two things. So first of all, they won the 2013 U.S. Cheese Championships. And in 2019, they were first and second runner-up with their aged Goudas. So I want everyone to know that. And then the other thing I wanted to point out is that on Marieka's website, it says empowering women. So almost all of the teams are led by women. Of course, Marieka herself, she also, by the way, on the side has 5 kids, I think, and 100 kids, I don't know. And in the meantime, when they moved to the farm, they had 350 cows. They now have 900 at least. So they've grown a little bit. Those are all girls too. And so
more women to celebrate, like females to celebrate.
Yeah. So anyway, and I just, I mean, I'm glad you said what you said, Jill, because I think you're not alone. People think of Gouda as a nondescript cheese, and this one is so not that. The complexity of this belies its ostensible simplicity, and I'm just super happy with it.
Yeah, and Marieka also makes and wins awards for her flavored Goudas. It's very common to flavor Gouda with fenugreek, cumin seed, nettles. She does all of those and then some. And a Dutchman once told me, when I asked him why, first of all, because the Dutch were, in the spice trade. And so they had these spices, but also he said, we eat Gouda like every day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So adding the spices was a way of just, adding a little more interest to this cheese that you had every day. It really does dominate the picture, the cheese scene in the Netherlands. And I just feel so lucky because we don't have a lot of Gouda producers in this country. It's just great that we have such an exceptional one.
We have a
So
lot of
thank you,
mass
Marieka.
produced Gouda, but not artisan.
Right, right. Jodi, I don't know, I don't want to put you on the spot, but you make cheese. Do you have any experience making Gouda, or do you have any comments on what you're experiencing as a cheesemaker in this cheese?
I really love this Gouda, and I enjoy it with both of the wines, seeing the different characteristics that each wine brings out. It tastes like a slightly different cheese with each one for me. I have made Gouda, and 18-pound wheel is a lot of work. That's a really big, hard, heavy make. So it's a workout to make a cheese like that, and I'm impressed by how many wheels they have to tend regularly. I don't make anywhere near that volume. It's impressive, but I really enjoy this Gouda with its the subtleties and the nuanced flavors that just keep coming in the finish. I really like that.
Yeah.
Well, Laura, do you want to maybe segue into Jodi and her cheeses?
Yeah, I'm just about to do that. I was just going to say though that I don't know if you saw this, Jill, but Danielle says these wines are so amazing, especially for the price point. Obsessed. So there you have it. Okay, on to Jodi. Jodi, you can tell us where the farm is. It's an hour south of Minneapolis, but Jodi herself has a degree in journalism, not cheesemaking. That came from the School of Hard Knocks, and she intended to be and was actually a writer and an editor. And then she and her husband bought the farm, and after that got sheep, and after that cheesemaking was just a fait accompli, basically. Even though what they had were dairy sheep. I guess you had dairy sheep, but not necessarily ones that were going to do the things that you needed them to do. So you essentially made that happen over time. Jodi is a founding member of the League of Minnesota Cheesemakers. I know you're all very familiar with that organization. And Jodi is not only a founder, but is the current president of that organization. And in addition to making cheese and raising 4 sons on the farm, 4 boys anywhere is just like an amazing feat to me. Jodi lives the farm is across from the Big Woods National Park, or not National Park, but park. And so Jodi likes to hang out there, take walks. And she says half-hearted gardening as well. We're on the farm. But what I can tell you is that there is no half-heartedness when it comes to the cheese making. So I think, Jodi, I think what we'll do is we're going to show the video and then we'll come back to you.
Somewhere back in our histories, I think maybe everyone was a shepherd.
I'm Jodi Ohlsen Reed, and I'm a cheesemaker. This is my husband, Stephen. He is our shepherd.
Shepherd's Way Farms is a dairy sheep cheesemaking operation that my wife and I and our 4 boys operate just outside of Nerstrand, Minnesota. The goal, of course, is you're taking sunshine, turning it into grass, turning it into milk, turning it into cheese. We started farming in the fall of 1994, and with a small flock of non-dairy sheep that we hoped would become dairy sheep. And we were in a very small rented property at that time.
I really like sheep milk cheese. There's something about the sheep milk that allows the cheese to develop a real depth of flavor. The quality of the milk is the most important thing in making a good cheese. So if you want an outstanding knock your socks off cheese, you have to have the best milk. As a cheesemaker, I love knowing what our sheep eat, how they live, what they're doing, and that the milk is coming right from the milking parlor into the milk room. That's more important than my abilities as a cheesemaker. I just have to not mess it up.
Oh my gosh. I just love that. So how do you not mess it up, Jodi? Tell us how you do your thing. Or actually, just tell us a little bit more about, I mean, you've had quite the wild ride as a cheesemaker. That isn't what you set out to do, as I said before. You've been doing this now, you and Stephen, or Steve, as I've always known him, but I'm not his wife, are doing amazing things in your little corner of the world. And so just tell us about your day-to-day.
Well, currently, I still make every wheel of cheese on the farm. We have a very tiny crew. We have me, and then I have a part-time assistant in the cheese rooms. And Stephen is still in charge of all the flock and the dairy sheep and the land management and a lot of the business end of things. So right now we're in the middle of lambing. This is our second round for the year. Usually, dairy sheep don't milk year round. They have a limited milking cycle, so our milk is available cyclically. This year is the first year that we milked year round, and that was breeding them out of season isn't doesn't always work, but this year for some reason it worked really well. So we had a very good crop of lambs in the fall, which allowed me to make cheese year round. Now we're having our second group of lambs. Which will boost our milk production again.
Those darn sheep, you had your vacation all planned, right? No.
It is, I did miss my downtime because that's when I do things like cheese plant repairs. When you're this small, you wear all the hats, not just a lot of hats, you wear all the hats. So that's my time when I do things like that and work on food safety plans and the not so fun parts of cheese making. But now this year we're just squeezing those things in between the usual routine. But,
well,
yeah.
And you have, I mean, you have your four sons, none of whom are on the farm anymore because they're all grown, but all of them help out in one way or another at this point, right?
Yeah, the roles that they play shift around depending on what they're doing. Right now, my oldest son, who's on the call also, Aiden, he comes down at least once a week and milks and helps out and often we do two farmers markets in Minneapolis and St. Paul, so helps with that. Occasionally I recruit him into the cheese make room, and my youngest is planning to work the farm full time when he finishes college. So we have him a few days a week and full time during breaks and summers. And then my other two sons have other careers, but they come in for a variety of things. I'm not sure it's a choice.
Tell us about the Friesago. How old is it and how do you make it?
The Friesago was the first cheese that we ever made in 1998. We had been just selling milk through the sheep dairy co-op in Wisconsin to a cheese making company. And we both had full-time jobs outside that at the time. And suddenly the buyer was no longer buying milk, so we had a surplus of milk and we had to figure out what to do with it. And so we made our first batch of Friesago in 1998. We worked with the University of Minnesota, they have a pilot plant where companies can lease the space and expertise to develop new products or test out products. And they had made sheep cheese previously. They had a sheep dairy station in the 80s. They had closed it up, but they still had the cheese maker and the professor. So they helped us develop a recipe and do our very first batch. And we did quite a bit of very fast research before we made it to find out what the world would support or what our local market would support for sheep cheese. And at that time, it was a very different world than we have now for sheep cheese. People were not very familiar with it and there wasn't a lot available. And the first version of Friesago was black waxed, and because that was the cheese fashion of the time, and there wasn't a lot of natural rounded cheeses. I just have to say that Judy Shad and Alice from Sweet Home Dairy were very supportive of me as what Judy called me the baby cheesemaker, because it was that long ago that I made my cheese, and they welcomed me into their group and were extremely supportive. And I was embarrassed by my waxed cheese when I listened to them talk about natural rinded cheeses and how much better they were. And Alice was enormously supportive and took me aside and told me not to worry one bit and to make my cheese any old way I wanted because it's my cheese. And I still hear that in my head fairly often. It's an encouragement that brought me a long way. I really appreciate the cheese making women that ventured into it before I did. But eventually, fashions changed and the Friesago changed too. I started making blue cheese in my very small facility, and blue is very bossy, so it found its way under the wax, and that made it very clear to me that it was time to do a natural rinded cheese. So this this cheese soaks in the brine for 72 hours, and then when we take it out, we wash it with brine every day for a week, and then every other day for a week or 2 weeks, and then every couple of days, and it too gets turned and washed every day to create a nice natural rind. And then we let it develop a variety of molds and yeasts that grow on the outside and give it a lot more flavor than it had when it was a waxed cheese. This one is about 6 months old. A lot of the time we send them out younger than that, but thanks to the pandemic and the drop in restaurant sales, some of our cheeses were around a little bit longer, which is actually very nice for the Friesago. It gives it a chance to develop more flavor and more character than when it's young.
What flavors do you what flavors are you looking for in this cheese?
Primarily I like the first note that I like about it is a grassiness. It's just a little, it's not bright, but it's a grassy green flavor, a little bit slightly fruity, but not too far down. And then the nuttiness. I like this cheese the way that it first presents as a nice kind of simple, oh, that's nice. And then that nutty flavor starts to emerge and lingers a little bit longer. And then the finish of that's what I look for. And just a real clean flavor. And that comes from the milk. That's the part that I don't want to mess up. The sheep give me the good milk, and I want to make sure that I create an environment where it can just keep evolving and blossoming with flavor. And if you age this a long time, you do get more crystal, and it gets a much deeper kind of brown butter note to it. I've aged it as long as 2.5 years just to see, but I only had a couple wheels that hung around that long. So,
well,
I want to ask you about the mold, because when I looked at my piece, my big chunk, it did have some kind of orangish mold on the rind, and you've told me of kind of a fun story about that mold.
Well, when this bright orange mold first appeared, I was alarmed because it was bright, and I had been told that anything really bright was something to be concerned about. So I tried to get it identified. Nobody knew what it was. I ended up going to a mold workshop with Benjamin Wolf, a microbiologist, where we sat and talked about mold for an entire day, or we listened, he talked. And at the end, we could bring up a cheese to have him look at it. So I brought my little bag up and sat down across from him, and people are waiting in the back. And I took my cheese out, and it had the bright orange. And he looked at it and he goes, oh, and I thought, oh, I thought I might fall through the floor. But he said, it's gorgeous. I don't know if my pronunciation is accurate, but it's Ferendinum cassi, and it's orange mold that's most often seen on a sheep milk cheese, aged cheeses. They had seen it more in Europe when I first talked with him, and they didn't see it very much in the US. And then they started to see it in the Midwest, and now I think you're seeing it in more places. But it's not one that you can buy from a culture house. You can't order it and add it to your culture or to your cheese. It has to come naturally from your environment. So that was a sign of a very vibrant aging environment. So
yeah. Jill, did you have a wine preference?
This one again goes back to both. I really loved both. I noticed with the Pinot tends to be more savory. We call it the Santa Maria spice, Chinese 5-spice. I thought with this cheese, it actually brought out more of its red fruit. Like I was getting more cranberry and pomegranate. So I liked the combination, and I liked the savory note of the cheese. And I think we benefited with the age, just like when we have our wine that benefits from aging too. So it's a treat for us that it's a little bit more age. And then something you said at the end of your video is the not messing it up part. I say that all the time. Everything is happening in the vineyard. The farming team's been there 20, 30 years, and different than you. I don't wear a lot of hats. There's a huge, great team. Some of them are on this call. So there's a great team, but our job in the winery is the same thing, taking care of the year-long farming that has gone into the vineyard, and just carrying it through to the end without messing it up, like you said.
Yeah, we get such a nice palette with the milk and with the grapes, and they're beautiful tools to make everything that we make.
You know, Jodi, a lot of people, you're talking a lot about the rind, and people always want to know whether to eat a rind. So what's your suggestion with this particular cheese? Is it up to the eater, or do you have a recommendation?
It's up to the eater. It is edible, but it's very strong, and I tend not to eat the rind on this cheese, but I will put it in a soup. And
really?
Yeah.
It's like a Parmesan rind, or a pecorino, another pecorino rind. We'll put it we'll just add it to a soup to give it that umami, because it does seem like a waste. My dog is always hopeful that I'm going to give it to her.
Well, I want to leave enough time for our last cheese. We have one more cheese to go, and I know there are lots of questions I hope we're going to have time for. I did want to answer one question that I saw that is relevant to the videos. Somebody asked about the wood planks, that they thought the USDA or the FDA had outlawed the wood planks, and it's true that they threatened to, and there was such an uproar among consumers and professionals that they backed off. Wood planks have been used for aging cheese for centuries in Europe, so it's a good thing they backed off, because it was dumb. And we can talk later, if we have time, we can talk later about why you age on wood planks. But we do have one more cheese, and it's our stinker. At least it was, for me, it was really aromatic. It's Grayson from Meadow Creek Dairy in Virginia, high elevation. They're at about 2,500 feet in the Appalachian Mountains. And this is another type of cheese that we don't have enough of in the US. It's raw milk. It's farmstead, meaning they have their own cows. Grass-fed cows. This is a seasonal cheese. They only make it between I think April and November, when the cows are on grass. Otherwise, they do not make the cheese. So this cheese was probably made at the very end of the season, like October, November. It's probably about 4 months old, which is about as long as it goes. It gets a little stinkier, a little funkier. It is a washed rind cheese, so that's why it's a little bit damp and that kind of salmon color on the outside. That's from bacteria that grow because they love that salty, wet rind. And look at that gorgeous color. It's modeled after an Irish cheese called Durrus, D-U-R-R-U-S. The owner, Helen Feet, loved Durrus. So she went to Ireland, she learned how to make it, she came home, and it wasn't coming out right. So she said it never really found its groove until she brought in the square molds that you make taleggio in, the Italians make taleggio in. And once it had that square shape, it had the right surface area, to interior, and it was like a whole new cheese. It just started to mature properly as a square. So this is a square cheese, about 4 pounds, 4.5 pounds, usually not matured quite this long. It's because it's raw milk, it has to be at least 60 days, but this is more. So let's taste it. I would eat the rind. It's going to be a little salty, give you that little saline crunch, but it's part of the nature of this beautiful, look at the color. This is from the grass. And I know the cheesemaker has told me that her favorite cheese is the one she makes in the fall, because the fat's higher, the protein's higher in the milk. and she just thinks she makes a superior cheese in the fall. So we're lucky to have this.
I would just like to say that if this is challenging, the funky aspect of it, if it's challenging for anybody, then I would suggest that you don't eat the rind. The rind is just a tad bit stronger than the paste, the inside of the cheese. And so you can kind of work your way toward the outside. I love the rind because I love what you were just saying, Janet, that just sort of that crystalline texture. It's just so fun with the otherwise creamy cheese. And I like the flavor altogether. But as I said, not everybody does. And so start mild and go stronger is what I have to say.
Yeah, the cheesemaker, the second generation of Meadow Creek Dairy, Kat Feet, is on the call, I think. So she can answer some questions if you have specific questions about Meadow Creek Dairy. They've been making cheese. They've had a dairy since '88. They, again, like so many others, they started out just doing fluid milk and then moved into cheese making about 20 years ago. In fact, this is the 20th year for Grayson. So happy birthday, Grayson, if that's the name of the county where they are. It's very saline and beefy, and it's just like a really intense, brothy, beefy taste to me. And this is very typical of this washed rind style. I would say this is just classic washed rind. These are cheeses that started in monasteries, this type of cheese. Monks in, the Benedictine monks in France and Germany and Belgium are the first ones to make these washed rind cheeses. And it's said that they did it because they have so many fast days on the Benedictine calendar. And so they made these really super meaty cheeses that take the place of meat. I don't know whether that's true, but it's a nice story. And Jill, these are kind of challenging cheeses for wines. I'm curious whether you found a good match or you're going to fold.
I went with the Pinot. I think that worked better than the Chardonnay. And I was the same as you, where I opened it up right before the Zoom, and then I realized almost the whole house, but in the best way. I was like, whoa, this is my job. This is so cool. And I actually, Laura, from the last one, I do like to eat rinds and again, taste it without, or with the rind. And I do enjoy this rind.
So obviously that was a happy bark we heard from your dog earlier for the same reason. I'm sure it had to do with Grayson. So just saying.
Yes, very excited about this Zoom. Usually she doesn't pay attention to me.
If you don't go with a fruity wine, because neither of these is what I would term a fruity wine per se. If you don't do that, then I've had pretty good luck with Pinot Noirs with cheeses like this, just for everybody's information. Somebody wrote in the chat, they just wrote one word, they wrote bacon to describe this, their impression of this cheese.
Yeah, it's a little smoky.
Well, it is a little smoky. And cheeses like this, because they're washed rind, washed with salt water and the bacteria that Janet was referring to, they are by nature salty-er. This I would not, the amount of salt in this is extremely balanced, but you do get that salt. And so that is going to inform everything, including your wine choices. And you are right, Kat. So Kat Feet, as Janet said, is on the call. And she says that they use Grayson for grilled cheese, which is of course my favorite subject after these cheeses. And yeah, it makes a heck of a grilled cheese. And if you add caramelized onions to it, oh my gosh, it's just heavenly. So
yeah, I see a question about washed rinds. Somebody wanted it defined again. It just means that it's washed almost always with brine, with salt water. Now, sometimes people put bacteria into that brine, good bacteria, but usually it's often just salt water. And somebody else asked about how long you can keep these cheeses. There's a different answer for all of them. I'll just say that none of them is going to get better. They are all, once you buy them and cut into them, they're heading south. So you want to eat them as quickly as possible. The moister they are, the less long they last. Jodi, when you have a leftover Friesago, how do you store it?
Leftover Friesago.
Right.
Excellent answer, Jodi. Excellent answer.
Well, my favorite thing to use for this is this beeswax wrap that I got from a local bee guy. I like that the best because it protects it, but it doesn't give it that plasticky flavor, and then or wax paper. I don't have the fancy cheese paper that I should have on hand, but I'll just wrap it in butcher paper even and just stick it in a different container, especially if it's something that smells as good as Grayson. I'll put it in its own little container so that it doesn't dry out. But I don't like to wrap them in plastic because then they taste like plastic. But
yeah,
I always do have a block about at least this size in the fridge so that we can, I use it for everything.
And that beeswax paper that you talked about is available. You can definitely find it online. A lot of specialty stores have it, and it's reusable. So you just have to you kind of have to take care of it after in between cheeses. And I don't know that I would. I mean, even though you can wash it and you do wash it, I would tend to keep like different ones. So beeswax
for each cheese.
For each one, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, for every
Well,
cheese.
our hour has flown by. It's where did those 60 minutes go? This was just so much fun to share our love of cheese with you and with our guests Jill and Jodi, and celebrate the contributions of women to American artisan cheese. Men have a big role to play too. They make wonderful cheese, but today we're celebrating women, and we have just hope you'll come back next week for Age to Perfection, and check out the recordings of the previous Cheese O'Clocks if you haven't already. Laura, I know you'll have some final remarks.
Well, yeah, just to play on that. So again, the previous recordings are available, and the cheese collections that go with them and the wines are all available. And so you can play along just like this, as if it's live. The only thing you can't do is submit questions, because we won't be there to answer them live. But
Email us.
Yeah, you can email us. That's true. That'd be otherwise very frustrating experience for you. But I know I have many friends, loyal cheese friends, who have gotten the recordings because they can't do it on Thursday night. They can do it on the weekend with their families, with their friends, and that kind of thing. So I would highly recommend going and getting the cheese and the wines that are, as I said, still available. And then also please post again at Janet Fletcher NV, as in Napa Valley. I'm at Cheese Lady, that's CheezeLady, at Cambria Wines, and at Shepherd's Way Farms. Because we'd all love to see what tonight's experience on social media. And I guess with that, I'm just going to thank everybody. I loved how engaged you all were in the chat and Q&A too. I'm sorry we didn't get to everybody's questions, but as Janet said, feel free to email us, Janet and me, and we'll answer them, or Jodi on cheese questions, Jill wine questions, and or I'll answer Jill's questions and just pretend like I'm Jill. Anyway, thank you all very much. See you next week, we hope.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye.
Good night.